The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Webinar being offered in preparation for the upcoming National Permanency Conference, October 23rd and 24th in Nashville, Tennessee. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to go over a couple of housekeeping items related to today's webinar. First, you will notice a Zoom viewer button in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. You can use this button to adjust the size of your webinar screen. Secondly, in the control panel located on the upper right-hand side of your screen, you will see the word Questions listed. Use the plus and minus button to open or close the question box. This is any questions you have for Julie. The presenter will respond to questions at the end of the webinar, time permitting. And now I am pleased to introduce our presenter for today's webinar, Julie Beam.
Thank you. Oh, thanks, Nicole. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Keep going.
Julie has been the Executive Director of the Attachment and Trauma Network since 2009, but began her journey to becoming a wholehearted, whole-brain parent in 1998 when she and her husband added to their family by adopting internationally. This journey included foregoing her career in marketing consulting and spending countless nights researching and seeking resources across the country. The result is that Julie is a passionate student of all trauma-informed therapeutic parenting models and techniques and fervently believes that for children with developmental trauma and attachment challenges, their parents are the ones who can and must become their healing agents. Julie is honored to work daily with so many committed and experienced parents and professionals who volunteer through ATN to support, educate, and advocate for hundreds of traumatized children and their families each year. A highlight of her career at ATN has been to accept the 2016 Angel in Adoption Award given to the Attachment and Trauma Network for the organization's 2 decades of support and advocacy for adoptive families. Julie, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today.
Thank you, Nicole. I really appreciate the National Permanency Conference and Harmony Families for hosting this webinar series. We got a lot to talk about and a short time to talk about it. I've never done any speaking on schools, but what we have tons of questions and tons of different reasons that people show up for the webinar. So in order to know, and I've got a slide deck that we could talk for next week into. So in order to know what most of you want to know, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. So if you're all, hopefully everybody's like looking at your screen and ready to answer a poll question, and hopefully I can figure out how to do this. Okay, can you tell me, can everybody weigh in on this question? Tell me who you are. Gives me an idea of the audience that I'm speaking to. Okay, looks like almost everybody's going to vote here. That's great. Got everybody's attention right here at the beginning. That's awesome. Okay, so there's the results. As we can see, it looks like there are probably not as many educators in the room as there are folks that are working in other professions, child serving professions, treating professionals. I'm not sure who all is in the others, I'm guessing that could be adoption professionals and folks that are working with children in other ways. Maybe you didn't consider yourself a teacher per se, but you're working in early childhood or something like that, and about a fourth of our audience are parents. Okay, so then to help me out a little bit further, I want to know what you want to know. So if you would all humor me by answering my second question. Topics that I, the top thing you hope that I cover today. And I've obviously made the choices for you. But what is it out of these that you would really want to know? Okay, it looks to me like we're going to spend some time, focus a lot of time on talking about how trauma impacts learning and what are some things that could be done in the classrooms. I do have some slides in here and information about IEPs and 504 plans. If we don't get that covered and you're a parent in particular and you have questions, we could do a half a day on that topic alone, but I'm more than happy to try to answer or have some folks from our schools team at ATN try to help you with those specifics. So in that case, let's get started. I'm going to shut my webcam off so that everybody won't have any trouble seeing the slides, and we'll go. I don't really need to introduce myself except to say that through the School of Hard Knocks, I have learned a lot about how to school or not school children with significant trauma, and so I'm passionate to help everyone short-circuit that learning curve and make a difference in a lot of children's lives. So the best place to start is, what is trauma? Dr. Bruce Perry defines trauma as a psychologically distressing event that is outside the range of usual human experience. The key points here are that it involves intense fear, terror, and helplessness. So think about that: fear, terror, helplessness. Complex trauma, of course, is then a prolonged exposure to that. And many of our children who have come from hard places, children that are found in foster care and adoptive children, have had prolonged or multiple exposures to trauma, making it a complex trauma situation. And this could be things like physical and sexual abuse, neglect, poverty, even the process of adoption and relinquishment and abandonment and all of those things is considered a trauma. So if you know anything about the ACEs work, which we're really not going to go into today, it's a cumulative total of multiple traumas or the prolonged exposure to the same type of trauma that builds that complexity. There is while trauma itself, and I want to be really clear on this, is not a disorder, there is a disorder being proposed to be included in the diagnostic manual that is called developmental trauma disorder, because at the severe end of complex trauma exposure, especially when it is early exposure while the brain is developing, and especially chronic and severe, it alters the child's development. And as we will talk through today, it alters the child's ability to learn and function in school in typical ways. It can alter it a little bit. It can alter it to the point of it being a disorder. So developmental trauma disorder has been a proposed diagnosis that we at ATN are 100% behind seeing it get adopted, because it helps take the complexities of PTSD, conduct disorders, oppositional defiance, all of the labels that our kids get, ADHD, the reactive attachment disorder, RAD diagnosis, that don't quite fit. It helps us make more sense out of that for kids. So the important things to remember about somebody's trauma: we don't get to choose. We don't get to choose what traumatized somebody and what didn't. It may not seem like a big deal to us, or it may seem like there's no way that they wouldn't be impacted by that, and yet they aren't. The person that with the trauma doesn't get to choose either. They didn't choose to be traumatized. They can't choose to be untraumatized. It doesn't always show. You can't always tell. Children especially can't always tell us what's bothering them. You may not see a symptom at school. Parents will see the symptom at home. You may not see a symptom when the child first comes into your home in the case of foster care or adoption, but years down the road, things may show up. You can't get over it just by willing yourself to get over it. It just doesn't happen that way. And when we talk just briefly about the brain work and how the brain develops, that'll sort of become crystal clear for you on that. And just because you're in a safe place doesn't mean that you feel that way. And that's really important to remember for our kids, because our children, both in our homes, if we're parents, and in the schools, if we're educators, are generally in a safe place. That's our #1 job, and we do it well. But it doesn't mean that they feel that way based on whatever's happened to them previously, and it's so the concept that we refer to in this regard is called felt safety, and it's important that everybody in a classroom, everybody in your household has felt safety. And definitely trauma does impact learning. Trauma actually changes your brain. Whether it's a little trauma, like one event trauma, like once I had an automobile accident and I actually witnessed the car about to hit, did hit me from behind. They ran a stop sign, and I could see them coming up over the hill through my rearview mirror, and I knew it was going to happen, and it really impacted me emotionally and neurologically beyond the actual physical impact of the accident. And that was one trauma for one grown adult one time. So it changed my brain. It made me incredibly fearful to drive, and I obsessively looked in the rearview mirror, and I needed some therapy and help to work through that. So I know firsthand that it can change your brain in that one little way, so knowing some of the backstories of some children's incredibly intense trauma, it's very obvious that their brains have been impacted. For those of you who don't know about attachment theory and about the importance of attachment, I urge you to learn. If you're educators, that may be something that didn't come to you in your schooling, but it's an important part of understanding how to be trauma informed. We're all wired for connection, and I think that we all know that sort of innately. A lot of you may be going, what did she just say? And some of you may be going, of course we're wired for connection, and life is all about relationships. But the way that we get our self-identity, the way that we learn to feel safe in the world, the way that we understand who we are and how we process and see other people, the world, and ourselves in it, is through that earliest connection. And so healthy attachment builds from a baby having a need and the caregiver meeting the need and the trust developing, and that happens over and over and over again. In the case of complex interpersonal type trauma, which a lot of the children that we're talking about as being traumatized in this webinar have had that type of a background, come from that hard place, they didn't have this ability to build this trust cycle with a loving, available caregiver for a variety of reasons, and it's impacted them in a variety of not so great ways. Like I said, I'm moving pretty fast here, so if you've got questions, we'll take them later, and I'll catch them in email if I don't get a chance to catch them in the session today. I want to show you this brain in hand model, and I hope that that all of you are familiar with the work of Dr. Dan Siegel. At ATN, he's one of our heroes, because we think he's got so much of this right in terms of parenting strategies and understanding children, who, how children's brains develop neurotypically, but also understanding what to do to help them when they have had some hard times. One of the things that he does to simplify brain science for all of us, and so that we don't all just glaze over when people start talking about the amygdala and all of those things, and we go, what are they saying? Because it's really, it can be really intimidating to learn about the brain, is that he uses a hand model. And I think I'm actually going to turn my webcam back on really quickly to do this. And the more that we've done this, use this hand and brain model, the more that we like it, for two reasons. One is it really does, it really works to teach how the neurology, on a real basic level is, and two, it can be taught to kids. So I would encourage you to think about using this with the children that you work with, or the children that you're parenting, to teach them that this is how their brains work, because this is how everybody's brain works. And it's not just the kids who are really struggling to stay regulated, or really struggling because they've got some out of control behaviors from trauma. It's everybody's brain works this way. So you've got your hand up here. Let me see if I can get it in front of the camera. And if you bring your thumb in like this, this is the wrist, and coming up here is your brain stem and your cerebellum, and then here's your midbrain, and inside of your midbrain is a little walnut-shaped area called the amygdala, which, if you've done any reading on trauma, you may know about that. It's our fear center. It's our alarm bell. It's what tells us to be afraid of something. So it's in there, as well as a piece called the hippocampus, which is there to modulate and make sense out of what the amygdala is trying to say. So then, if you curve your fingers over the top, you get the rest of your brain, the thinking brain, that whole gray matter, the wrinkly part that you're used to, right? That's where it is. And right here, where my chipping blue fingernails are, is the prefrontal cortex, and that's the part that makes us uniquely human. It's the last part to really come online as the brain develops, but it's the part that allows us to have executive functioning, to multitask, to control our impulses, to plan and think ahead in the future. It's things that we can do that no other creature can do, are all located right there in my blue fingernails. So when you start to get upset about something, your amygdala, or you get afraid of something or whatever, your amygdala starts to fire, and it starts to fire this alarm. And if you're not very, very careful, your prefrontal cortex can't contain that and keep you calm, and you flip your lid. And everybody has had that experience. We have all flipped our lids. So when you're a baby and your amygdala fires over and over and over again because of this complex trauma, this prolonged exposure to whatever happened to you, you have a harder time not flipping your lid. But it's still a very, it's a very human response. It's the only thing that we can do in some cases when our amygdala is overwhelming the rest of our brain neurology. So showing this to children and teaching it to them really helps them be able to identify when they're about to flip their lids, when others have flipped their lids, and so that the others aren't weird or different or scary, but they've just flipped their lids. We actually have in our trauma sensitive schools team at ATN, in fact she's right there in the picture on the slide, Jen Alexander is one of our trainers, and she actually she's a school counselor in an elementary school in Iowa, and she actually does a brain unit with her third graders, and they talk all about flipping their lids and the parts of the brain and ways to stay regulated, and they teach it in such a way that it normalizes it across the third grade, so that and it's amazing to watch how the children are able to to work together then and to really interface with each other, and calm each other down, help, and just it's a very community building sort of way of handling brain science, and handling behavior. So moving on, the brain basics you need to know. This is boiled down as best as I can do it, as fast as, and that's just like the brain model, hand and brain model. The brain grows from the bottom up and from the inside out. So you can't expect somebody's brain to do something that it's not ready for. We don't expect babies to come out in three-piece suits and be able to talk and carry on a business meeting, because they just can't do it. The brains aren't there. So if you look at children who have developmental issues because of their trauma, you can, or for any other reason, you can look at them from a neurological standpoint and say, well, until their brain develops that way, they're going to struggle to do that piece. The other thing is, just like any other part of our body, the brain is a use it or lose it thing. Whatever we use gets stronger. So if we lift weights, our arms are going to get stronger. If we run, our legs are going to get stronger. If we use parts of our brain, whether they're thinking parts or calming parts, they're going to get stronger. And if we don't use them, they're going to get pruned away, and it's actually called that. There are specific neurological times in your development that you have more pruning than others, but your brain prunes away the pathways that it doesn't use, so that it can become more efficient. The reverse is true too. What you use gets stronger, and so it starts wiring together. It's sort of like like putting cable together. So if you think about children who've come from really significant trauma histories, the chaos is wired into their brains. It's happened to them over and over and over again, and their brain's expectations of what's going to happen, and their brain's over-response, if you have children that you think, wow, they over-responded to that, it's because their brain is wired for that. Hopefully we can rewire their brains, and we can wire our own brains to be more towards the calm. But whatever you do over and over and over again, and we all know that. I mean, driving a car is a great example, right? You don't have to think about all the steps of driving your car every day, adjusting your mirror, putting on your seatbelt. A lot of times you do all of those things without your prefrontal cortex ever passing a thought on doing them, because you've done it so much that your brain just is wired that way. The hopeful thing for folks that have their brains impacted by trauma is the fact that the brain can change. It's plastic. It's called neuroplasticity. We can rewire our brains just like we can build muscles and do other things in our bodies. Of course, it does take, just like in any other exercise, lots and lots of repetition and lots of work, but it can definitely be done. Okay, so to the interest of most of the group, how does trauma impact learning? And I am not sure that we added this infographic that we have at ATN as part of a handout today, but if we didn't, I can definitely make sure that you all get a copy of this. It's an infographic that we put together based on information coming out of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network about the domains of how trauma impacts learning. So each one of these little pictures stands for one of those domains. So let's look at it really quickly. It impacts their bodies and emotions. Yet the only way that you express your fear to the trauma is by a fight, flight, or freeze reaction, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Children of trauma often have sensory motor challenges. They often have balance challenges. They often have pain response challenges. Maybe they respond to every little hangnail or scab or whatever with severe extreme. Maybe they can have a severe injury. My daughter, when she was 2, fell down running across the sidewalk and bloodied both of her knees. She stood up, looked at them with disgust, kind of went like that, and just went on. That was an unusual pain response. She should have been crying. They were really scraped up knees. There's physical symptoms, so a lot of times you'll see these children in the nurse's office a lot because they have a tummy ache or a headache, and you may think that's not real. And on one level, it isn't really, there really isn't probably some severe GI distress going on there, but it is real to the way their body is perceiving things. It's a real somatic symptom. They may also be hypervigilant, easily distressed, have trouble with self-regulation, sound like any kids that you know. They may have difficulty expressing their feelings or even asking for what they need. They might have trouble even asking to do simple things like go to the bathroom or knowing when they're hungry. That seems to be, those things seem to be very, very common, especially a child who's been neglected, maybe a child who didn't have their needs met in those ways. Their body literally shut and brain sort of shut off that communication path. Remember, they lose what they don't use, and so they really don't know. Because their body is needing food or needing to go to the bathroom, they might become more agitated, but they're not really able to say, I'm hungry and I wish I had a snack. And they may get to the extreme of dissociating or completely shutting down. Okay, so here we are at fight, flight, or freeze. And some of you are probably familiar with this. The thing I want to point out on this particular slide is that if you don't know what trauma looks like and you're working with children and you're in a classroom, you may identify these behaviors as something else. You know, a child who is triggered and then goes into fight mode may be described as being challenging and stubborn and argumentative and always talking back. They may even accelerate into dangerous, violent sort of behaviors. And I think you probably are all imagining somebody right now because a lot of our kids are fighters. A lot of our kids are also flighters, and that means they're going to try to get away or make stop whatever it is that is triggering them. And they're not going to do that by coming up and telling you this smell or noise or thing is triggering me. Instead, they're going to appear distracted. They might appear hyperactive. They might even have ADHD as part of their diagnosis. They might always be seeking your attention. You're thinking, why is this kid always seeking my attention? He's trying to seek comfort from you and distract himself from whatever this trigger is around that. They may actually physically get up and flee or hide under the table, those types of things. Probably not so much with the older kids. The older kids are going to be the ones that seem to be really hyperactive and distractive, and yet at other times aren't. And that's part of the way you can tell that this isn't necessarily ADHD. It's like one day they're one way and one day they're another way, because the trigger, the trauma, whatever's sparking the trauma isn't, it's not consistent across an environment a lot of times, and so they can look one way one day or in one setting and different in another. The freeze children are the ones that are at the severe end of dissociating. I mean, they're not, a freeze response doesn't mean you're at the severe end. I didn't mean to say it quite like that, but when you have a freeze response, at the very severe end of that freeze response is dissociation. But it could be the kids that look like daydreamers, the ones that are looking out the windows, the ones that sort of just like go blank all of a sudden. You don't really know, where they went. They were here and now they're gone. they stare off, they don't seem to care, you say, well, you've got to do this by now and get it done and whatever, and they're just like, I don't care, and they give you that blank look. It's because they've gone to a whole nother part of their brain to escape whatever the pain is that they're seeing. So what behaviors? Impulse control is a big one. Poor impulse control for our kiddos. They can be aggressive, sometimes, not always. They can be oppositional, some of them. The ones that turn that behavior inward can have self-harming behaviors. They can have eating behaviors. Some of them can be overly compliant, just like never, like constantly trying to please you and constantly just doing exactly what is said, and maybe no more, but they're just trying to keep everything, as calm as possible, because perhaps things aren't calm as possible at home, or they haven't been, and they're trying to calm the chaos. Our older kiddos can definitely be at higher risk for substance abuse, as well as all of the self-harming behavior, as well as all of the eating problems and all of those things. How does trauma actually impact their ability to learn academically? Well, in addition to all of that, which is really sort of social, emotional, neurological, all of those things that would prevent them from really being able to attend to what's being taught by a teacher, their cognition is impacted as well. So a lot of times you'll see kids with backgrounds of trauma as not being as curious. They don't ask the questions why. They don't seem to be as eager to learn. They don't, they're not, they don't just innately explore their environments. They can definitely have learning problems. They can definitely have processing problems. My daughter had auditory, visual, and sensory processing problems, as well as language development and processing problems. A lot of that was tied to early neglect and not having her brain stimulated in that way. You can't learn language if you're not talked to, period. That's just sort of the way that it works. It does present a lot of problems because it's like layer upon layer. So you've got some behavior problems, and you've got some attention problems, and now you've got some processing problems and some other things to do. A lot of our kids follow a trajectory of they do okay in preschool and early elementary, but then when things get harder in terms of academics, where you're having to process information and come up with your own ideas, do the executive functioning things, sort of plan things out, then they start to struggle, or they get to middle school level where they're asked to handle the expectation of 4 or 5 different teachers and different deadlines, and the teachers are trying to teach that level of student how to be more independent, and our kids really start to struggle because they can't figure out, how am I going to meet this deadline and this deadline, and what steps do I have to go through to get this done? And those are executive functioning problems. They have problems with the planning and organization. They have problems understanding cause and effect, and that seems to be a big one across the board for a lot of our kids, is that that part of what happens because of the impairment within that limbic system, within that amygdala and hippocampus, is that our kids can't predict. And I know my daughter, when we would do reading with her, and that's one of the activities you do early on with little kids with reading, is you have them predict what's going to happen next in the story. She is 20, about to be 21, and she still can't do it. She can't do it with movies, she can't do it with books, and in fact gets very frustrated if you ask her, well, what do you think the character is going to do next? Well, what do you think the sequel is going to be like? Well, what do you think is going to happen here? And she just doesn't know. Trauma also impacts self-concept. It's that early attachment, I feel safe in the world, I matter to the world, that didn't get developed. So we see kids with backgrounds of trauma as having low self-esteem. They really do. Now, some of them, you're going to go, wait, I am parenting a kid who thinks he knows everything, who is large and in charge, and well, yeah, he is in your home, but underneath all of that, it's because he's feeling he's feeling inadequate. It's like a coverage, right? It's the grandiose bragging sort of thing. A lot of our kids are built, their entire self-concept is built on shame, that they're bad, and sometimes they'll express that. Other times they won't be able to get to that at all, and sometimes they will prove that they're bad through their behaviors. They may blame others, or they may blame themselves. I mean, these are the kids that sometimes will sit there and go, I'm stupid, I'm stupid, I'm stupid, or sometimes they'll sit there and go, he's stupid, she's stupid, you're stupid, because they don't have a confidence in an internal self-worth. They may grow up, especially girls, to have the body image problems, and they may do a lot of behaviors that seem to be self-sabotaging. The one that gets parents every year is the kids that do all of their homework and then don't take it to school, don't turn it in. Happens a lot with our population because they just don't feel they're worthy, or maybe I'm stupid, and it just, it doesn't make a lot of sense to the rest of us that are using our frontal parts of our brains to reason that out, that would be, that's not a good course of action, but it's rooted in this self-concept. Of course, in relationships, they struggle there too. They'd mistrust others, and you can obviously see why, because this trauma that we're talking about, the complex trauma, is generally a relationship-based trauma. It's things that have happened to them that should not have happened to them within a healthy family or a healthy community. So they may be clingy and overly dependent, well beyond beyond the age that a developing child should be clingy, or they may be withdrawn. They may immediately walk away from their parents at the preschool door when they really should have been a little more clingy. They may end up with problems with peers, both as the bully and as the victim. In fact, we just did a whole journal issue on bullying, and there were a lot of articles about how children from trauma can end up in those situations in a big way, both in the bullying and in the victimization side of things. They may be overly helpful to teachers and solicitous of attention, and that's not necessarily a bad thing if you give them attention for that, but it can be a bad thing in how overly it is. And you may run into the children that have a lot of the attachment disorder type things, and they totally lack empathy of others, and it's alarming and sometimes very scary to deal with kids that have no empathy and no cause and effect type understanding, but it's also very neurological. Their brain literally cannot take the position of somebody else, cannot get outside of themselves and understand what somebody else is going through and feeling and experiencing. They really don't understand in themselves with it. So what can we do to help these kids in school? Well, in the ideal world, we would all be working for trauma-sensitive, trauma-informed schools and systems, and therefore would be solving a lot of this problem right up front. A trauma-sensitive school is one that all the children feel safe, welcomed, and supported, and one where addressing trauma's impact on learning is done on a school-wide basis. It's center in the mission, so it's from the top down. And at ATN, our Creating Trauma-Sensitive Schools program, it's one of the 3 programs we have. We have a parenting program, we have the Creating Trauma-Sensitive Schools program, and we have an awareness program. And the goal, our primary goal, is to help schools do this on a system-wide basis. That's not always what we're brought in to do in our schools training, but that's really the goal, because when a school puts trauma-informed care at the center, it impacts all of the children. And if you remember back where I said we don't get to choose our trauma, they don't get to choose their trauma, we can't always see the trauma. Research, especially the research through ACEs, says that as many as 1 in 4 of all children in every classroom is impacted by trauma enough that it impacts their learning. So that's 25% of our population, our children population in all of our schools and education. That's kind of mind-blowing. except to understand that if we approach things in a trauma-sensitive way, we can really impact more children than we would ever know. We may never identify, oh, that child has definitely got trauma, but we can help change their trajectory by embracing a trauma-sensitive mindset. So let's talk about what that looks like. It's both basic and complex right here. It's what we call at ATN the paradigm shift, the big one, right, in our thinking, where we're no longer looking at a kid that is behaving in a way that we don't understand and saying, what is wrong with you? Instead, we're looking at this child and thinking to ourselves, what happened to you? What is going on here that's underneath this particular situation and behavior that we need to figure out how to address? So when we go out and train trauma-sensitive schools, the four tenets that underpin a lot of what we do are these right here. Making sure that everybody feels safe, that felt safety piece, how to connect with children, how to help them get regulated while we stay regulated ourselves, because let me tell you, children in preschool and children in high school can dysregulate the adults around them, with their trauma. We at ATN we say, trauma is contagious. We got to be careful not to catch it, because it's true. If you work with kids who are dysregulated enough, it's very difficult and very intentional practice on your part to keep yourself regulated, because your brain's amygdala goes into alarm mode just like theirs. You flip your lid. So, and then, only then, when people are feeling safe, when people are connected, when people are regulated, is everybody ready to learn. I mean, you can't learn because, remember, your brain's not online. Your thinking brain, my blue fingernails, are not online and ready to think until all of those other things have happened. So that's, in the nutshell, conceptually what it is. You may or may not have heard about resilience, and that's real. There are a lot of educators and systems and movements in education talking about building resilience. Building resilience is really important. It's also really important to understand what builds resilience. Resilience is the antidote to trauma. It is the answer, but you have to know how to build it. And this may be where some of the programs are kind of missing the mark. The single most common factor for children who develop resilience is at least one stable, committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. And this is research on resilience. And if you go to the Harvard Center on the Developing Child's website, it's at the end of my slides, there is an entire section on resilience, and they explain it really well, what it is, how it's built, what the other factors are. But research shows that the most common factor in kids who are more resilient than other children is they have a committed relationship with someone. So, so you have to be that someone or find that someone. I mean, and that someone doesn't have to be their parent. Ideally, it is. But it can be teachers, it can be grandma, it can be others. And so when you see these children coming out of really hard places, the hero success stories, the ones that look like they have pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps, they haven't pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps. There's been somebody behind them that helped them develop that resilience, at least one somebody, maybe more, that have supported them and taught them and helped them learn to regulate, help them build relationships. It has always happened that way. It doesn't mean that they didn't have personality that had some grit to it and all of those types of things, but what it does mean is that resilience is built through relationship, and we need to focus in a trauma-informed way on connecting with people. There's the parent meme is connect before you correct. We have to connect with these children before we expect them to learn anything else or change their behaviors, period. So how do you do that? Two things. It's all about, when we teach parenting, when we teach trauma-sensitive schools, it's all about two things: relationship and regulation, period. Those, everything sort of lines up in those two columns. So relationship Be curious about what's happening with a kid. Instead of, Johnny, I told you to stay in your seat, down eye level, looking at Johnny. What's going on? What's going on? Come over here and sit next to me. The relationship piece, the connecting piece, it's different. And in fact, I just did that example completely with different tone. If you could see me, if I turn my webcam back on, you'd have seen a different eye contact. Take the time to do that. In order to do that, obviously, we can't take it personally. We can't think that Johnny's got a personal vendetta, that he's out to get us. That's probably not what Johnny's about at all. Johnny's probably just trying to keep himself safe in your classroom, in your home. It's definitely not about you. Even when it gets personal, even when he says, Mrs. Johnson, I hate you, it's still not about you. It's about Johnny. You have to give them opportunities to practice that social emotional skill. And I know that that doesn't happen in a lot of our schools these days. And I know that schools have a lot of things that they have to teach. But I'm here to tell you that when we get this right, when we get this connectedness right, our children are more ready to learn. So they need opportunities to practice. And one of the most important things that they can do is called making a repair. If you know anything about restorative justice and some of the other responsive classrooms and some of the other trauma-informed, we call them trauma-informed, they wouldn't necessarily define their methods that way, but they are. It's very important to make a repair for two reasons. One, it repairs that relationship. If the child has done something, torn up your things, torn up the teacher's desk, it does make you feel better for the child to figure out how to repair that act. But more importantly, it's good for him or her because it reduces their shame and it builds their self-concept that, no, I'm not a bad kid. I'm a kid who did a bad thing and now I did a good thing. And that's huge. That's a huge step for us to make. It's a huge step for all human beings to make. On the regulation side, that has to be actively taught and practiced too. You have to co-regulate with the kids. We tell parents to do that, and I would tell teachers that they need to do that too. I mean, first of all, we have to stay calm. All of us have to stay calm no matter what the kid is throwing at us, literally or figuratively. And so we've got to be able to get grounded and do our own work as well. But in order to model that effectively, a lot of times we have to co-regulate. When a child or more than one children are starting to amp up, the best thing we can do is bring everybody back down together. Do it with them. Use sensory, use movement, give breaks, and teach children how to do it. I know a lot of times we write into IEPs for a lot of our kids that they get to take a break or they get to use sensory things, but we don't show them how to use it and we don't show them how to make it available to themselves, or we make them go ask somebody specific for permission, and by the time they get through all of those hoops, their brain is totally flipped and they can't use it. Instead, we can teach the child, this is what you do when you need to take a break. When you need to take a break, you come over here, and these are the options that you have to help yourself, get regulated. Or you go see this person, and then you actually practice that skill. You plan ahead of time for what happens when students flip their lid, so that you're not caught in the middle of that storm, right? Okay, so I'm not gonna spend any time on this. We're running pretty tight on time. We want to get to some questions, except to say that if you are a parent and you're headed down the path to a 504 or an IEP, it's really important that you go grab this book, and I'm not getting any kickback from these people, from Wright's Law, this From Emotions to Advocacy book, and you read it before you end up in a due process court case, unlike I did, and I read it afterwards and went, dang, I wish I'd have known all this stuff. It helps you understand the game, and there's no way for me to put it except for that. Special education really is, it's like a chess game, and you have to understand how it's played, and then you'll be more effective at knowing how to do what you need to do, and when you need more help doing it. And I'll be happy to send you all these slides. The gist of addressing behaviors is understanding that the behavior is communication. What our children are communicating. What are they trying to tell us through that behavior? They can't necessarily tell us, with words. Asking them why does not work. So looking at what happened before, looking at what's happened throughout the day. My daughter kept having a meltdown in reading class. We just finally discovered it was from sensory buildup from the time she hit the building to reading class, which was the first academic class in the morning. But it took us weeks to trace back through like detectives to figure that out. So I'm going to let you all get a copy of these slides and look through this and ask me questions about the difference between 504s and IEPs. And if you have a specific question, we'll try to answer that. So I'm going to get through all of these. Trauma-informed instruction. I'm looking to see if there's things I really need to point out here for. Okay, again, it's making sure that everybody feels safe, that everybody understands what's going on. There's a consistency in tone, consistency in routine. Our children respond, change and transition are scary because you don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, some of our kids may have lost their parents instantaneously, through a variety of ways. Their entire world changed. So from that perspective, every time there's an obvious change, boom, their amygdala says, oh my gosh, here we go again, right? And they're off to the races. So keeping things consistent, explaining if there's going to be an inconsistency, reassuring that it's going to be okay. Giving them as much choice as you can, obviously weighted choices, the choices that you can live with. Collaborating with the child, thinking in terms of it's not me against this child, or not me making this child do something, but let's work together. How can we work together to make sure that you're sitting in your seat and ready to learn math? How can we? Let's come up with a plan together. And then, of course, empowering and pouring in. That's the relationship building, right? You did that really well. I noticed that you did. One of the things that's really important for a lot of our kids is when you do that, it's not you're a good kid. You did a great job, good kid. It's a specific, because first of all, they don't think they're a good kid. Remember, they think they're the bad kid. And so when you tell them that they are good, it's incongruent with who they are. So instead, you point out what they did well. You did that math sheet really well. You held the door for the teacher, and I noticed. Those types of things. That's what helps fills our kids' tank, and it helps them identify. Oh, I just did that. Okay, moving on. There we go. Other things you can do in a trauma-informed classroom, a lot of the stuff is the sensory things, the lighting, the seating, the sounds, everything being soothing, the ability to bring everything down, to regulate down, the ability to get up and move whenever there's starting to be an escalation of behaviors. Let's move. Let's sing our math problems. My daughter actually learned her multiplication tables sitting on a bouncy ball, and she would bounce around the room, and they were like tacked to the room, and she'd to the wall, and she'd bounce and say 2 times 2 is 4, and then bounce to the next one, and it worked for her. And it also helped her stay calm and regulated. Allowing kids to get up and move around, guided social time, chances to practice that. Make sure that there's no unstructured time. Unstructured time is unsafe. It can lead to chaos. Not knowing what's supposed to happen is scary. Make sure everybody knows the plan. Make sure everybody, eliminate shame. And if you haven't, if you don't know what that means, I invite you to delve into the whole issue of shame, because it's huge. It's huge for all of us too. At ATN, we love Brene Brown's work. She's a social worker who is a shame researcher, and I highly recommend. She's got a bunch of YouTube videos and TED Talks and things. You can delve into that with her there. This is a big one. I know we're running out of time. this is a big one that everybody asks, because so many of our schools and so many of our parenting models function on a reward and consequence system, and so many of our kids are not doing well in that. Here's why. A behavior mod system triggers their amygdala. It can trigger their amygdala. Oh my gosh, what if I don't do this right? Oh my gosh, of course I'm not going to do this right. I'm a bad kid. So boom, 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 my amygdala is firing. I'm not going to get this prize. I'm not going to get this prize. I have literally watched my daughter, because she externalizes a lot in her talking, walk through that kind of a step. I'm not going to be able to meet whatever this bar was that was put in front of me on this behavior mod system, and so I'm now worried about that. So now I'm amping up because of that, and guess what happens? I'm right. I didn't make that behavior because I got so dysregulated that I got out of control in some way. I fought, or I did whatever the behavior was I wasn't supposed to do because I couldn't stop myself because I got so triggered, and it makes a vicious cycle for me as the trauma kid over and over and over again. It taps into those feelings of shame and failure. It heightens their anxiety. It's sort of a no-win situation for our kids. Even when they get the prizes, it's a no-win situation sometimes because of those feelings of shame they get. It requires self-regulation, and we've identified that that's a huge thing that doesn't happen for our kiddos, is that ability to self-regulate. It has to be taught through a co-regulation. So the use of behavior mod, even if it's just all positive, even if it's all rewards, is really not very effective with our kids, and it can lead to more problems because it's much more important to work on building the relationship and on teaching the regulation skills. It implies that the behaviors that these children have is a won't, and that they can really do something about it. And like I said at the very beginning, our kids can't do it. It's their neurology that shows that they literally cannot self-regulate. They literally cannot do these things without a lot of support around that, and a lot of practice, because we're trying to rewire and change those pathways. It doesn't address the reason for the behavior. Okay, so what does work? Planning ahead for what the school will do if the child becomes dysregulated. Where's the safe place? Practice going to the safe place. What's the child going to do when they get there? Using your connecting and co-regulating skills. Be consistent at doing that. And actually, when teachers and schools shift and start going here, they start realizing it works better for all of us. I mean, we all wanted to connect and co-regulate. That's kind of reward enough for most of us. That whole relationship and feeling all calm and regulated with each other, those are rewards for all of us. We're human beings. That's the way we work. Providing consistent structure and routine, highly important. And making sure that all the staff are on the same page. I mean, it's really hard if you're a teacher listening to me and you say, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to study a whole bunch about trauma-sensitive schools, and I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to use all kinds of approaches in my classroom, and then your principal's not for that. It's not going to last very long. And if the other teachers in the building aren't using it when the children switch classes, then boom, there we go. So we, again, at ATN really feel like it needs to be a school-wide thing. We recognize how difficult that is sometimes, and we would encourage you that if you're in a classroom and you're trying to implement these things, please implement as much relationship and regulation coaching as you can, because it will help your kids. But it's just infinitely harder when not everybody in the school is doing it. And again, that whole modeling the repair, the apology of action, it's so important. That really is important for us as a society, so that we learn to make repair when we've hurt somebody, even if we've hurt them inadvertently, and we're able to go through that and keep that shame level down. Okay, I've got a whole nother section that I'm not even going to do on becoming an advocate for your child. Let me say this. It's a delicate balance. When you're advocating with schools, my experience, School of Hard Knocks parents, if you're listening to me, is that you have to be as kind as you can be, as knowledgeable as you can be, and work really hard as part of the team. at the same time, you have got to be prepared that you might not always be a team, that you might have to, drop the hammer and go for, some kind of litigation or those types of things. So you have to keep records, you have to put things in writing, you have to constantly be keeping track of things. So it's kind of a dual role, and it's tough. So there's a lot we could talk about on another time about how all of that might work. I'd be happy to talk to people individually about that as well. I know I'm running right up against 2 o'clock, folks. So let me click through these real quick. I want to go back. The slides have a whole list of resources. Happy to share those with you. And I do want to invite you all to sign up for both on our website and on our Facebook page. There's a way to sign up to be on our email list, and that will get you information about all the things we're doing that's school related. We have a free audio summit. We're airing 2 recordings next week that were from our audio summit this spring that you may want to listen to. Dr. Ross Green, who does collaborative problem solving with kids, and Heather Forbes, who wrote the book Help for Billy in School. We're going to air their interviews next Friday, and you can listen to that for free. Stay tuned. We're going to have an exciting announcement about a school, trauma-sensitive schools conference that ATN is going to host in the DC area in February. That we should be announcing that very soon. So I encourage you to visit this website, creatingtraumasensitiveschools.org, or our main website, attachmenttrauma.org, and sign up for our mailing list so that you get that information. Okay, so Nicole, I ran us right up to the end. I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry.
It is okay. No worries. I'm glad that the last slide there for folks, I think we just had a couple questions, of which I think, Julie, you pretty well went over. But for those of you that are still on the line with us, if you have any additional questions, you see Julie's email address there at the bottom of your screen, julieb@attachedtrauma.org. Just a couple things for me. I really hope that you all have enjoyed today's webinar. Julie, a special thanks to you for presenting on such an important and timely topic. Also want to let folks know that the recording from today's webinar will be available by early next week, and you can access the recording by going to www.harmonyfamilycenter.org. Also, you will receive a certificate for 1 hour training, and we'll send that to you via email. Give us 7 to 10 business days, and you should receive that in your inbox. Lastly, if you have not yet had opportunity to register for the upcoming National Permanency Conference, I certainly would encourage you to do so today. This is, number one, a great opportunity to hear from Julie for longer than an hour, so that's definitely a plus. Dr. Bruce Perry will also be our keynote speaker, and you just absolutely will not want to miss it. You can find out more information about the NPC by going to the Harmony website. So thank you all again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at the NPC next month. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.